All right, and with that, we are going to move on to our first session, which is on climate change and conservation outreach. So, of course, if you're in ecology or the natural sciences, these are very important research topics because ultimately what we're trying to do is guide effective policy and management that can lead us to a more equitable and sustainable future. So, the upcoming talks will touch on two key themes. The first one will be how do we engage with local communities and use local ecological knowledge to enhance our own research in climate change and conservation? And second, how do we engage with the general public and youth to dismantle misinformation around these important topics as well as lead to meaningful change? So is Michelle Tseng, who is a professor at the University of British Columbia. And today she will be talking about a butterfly monitoring program that she started at BC.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thank you to the organizers for having me today. This is it's pretty exciting for me. I have not presented this work before, so it's nice to have an opportunity to put it all together. And so I'm joining you today from my house here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Vancouver is on the traditional unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I am definitely an uninvited settler to these lands. My family is originally from Taiwan, which is a small island off of China, and Taiwan actually has a really bizarre history of being sort of alternating being colonizers and being colonized by various groups. So it's been, I hope that this sort of history that my family went through helps me to use my considerable position of privilege here as a professor in a university to, affect positive change for Indigenous relationships here in Canada, and especially in academia. I feel like I do have some say now in what I teach and how I teach it, and how we better integrate Indigenous knowledge into ecology classes in university in Canada. So that's something I'm working on the side. I won't talk about that today at all. Today I'm going to talk about a butterfly monitoring program that I didn't start it, so I'm going to just correct that. This is definitely a huge collaboration between the David Suzuki Foundation and the University of British Columbia, as well as a whole bunch of regular people who have regular jobs and they're not in academia at all. So we actually had a meeting last night because what I'm talking about today is actually actively happening right now. We're recruiting people, and it's all happening right now. So this is our some of the team members who were able to make it last night. And this is this lovely lady is Winnie. She is our David Suzuki Foundation person. She kind of runs the show, and we're here to support and provide. I'll talk a little bit about sort of the role and how we divvy up all the work. But I did want to really emphasize that this project is very much a community participatory project and has a lot of different expertise from a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And I think that's what makes it work really well. Okay, so how does this partnership actually work? The David Suzuki Foundation, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit organization in Canada started by David Suzuki, who was a professor at in my department, actually, in zoology at UBC a long time ago. And their foundation is, what I like about their foundation is that they really try to use evidence-based approaches to towards advocacy and towards really pushing for policy change. And they also have something that I don't have, and that's like that whole like machinery of reaching out to people, engaging with people, and the communications. They're really good at that end of things as well. And so how UBC support. So within UBC, there's my group and as well as another group that supports this project. And we support via data analysis, background research, and we try to bring in a lot of undergraduates to hear their input on these projects, as well as you'll see, I use this project as a big teaching tool in my big undergraduate classes. And we also can look at the data and look for data gaps and knowledge gaps as well. So I like to think of it as a really nice mix. Each of us bring our strengths to the project, and I think it's been working pretty well. So, you know, why are we doing what we're doing? So why a butterfly monitoring program? So British Columbia is definitely lacking in just general data in butterflies. Butterfly monitoring, I don't actually know when the last census was created, maybe in 2000. There's a publication in 2000 that lists the butterflies of BC. The latest COSEWIC reports list 10 endangered or extirpated insects in British Columbia, and 10 of those are butterflies, which is shocking to me given the wide diversity of insects that are out there. And I like to call them the birds of the insect world, because a lot of the general public are very insect adverse, but fewer of them hate butterflies. So, I mean, they're like pretty, and you can, if your timing is right, you can take a picture of them, which is nice. And they are, like, compared to a lot of other insects, relatively easy to identify. So this altogether, from a biodiversity crisis perspective, as well as from a human people engagement perspective, we felt that this was sort of the best of both worlds. And there's a history of butterfly monitoring as well in within the David Suzuki Foundation. And they started off in 2018 with this project called the Butterfly Way program. And this runs nationwide. So you may have butterfly way gardens where you are today. And that's a project where you sign up, and anyone can sign up, and they send you, or they give you, there's local groups, and the local groups give out local native plants. And the idea is that you create a butterfly garden where you are. It could be on the balcony of an apartment. It could be next to your sidewalk. It could be, if you have a giant garden, you can put it in there as well. With the goal of building this network of butterfly habitat across Canada. And it was highly successful. Like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have signed up to do this, and have planted gardens. Vancouver is a good example. We have many of these blue lawn signs across lots of neighborhoods in Vancouver. So the Butterfly Way project sort of is the progenitor of this butterfly monitoring program. And in the last few years, so in 2019, 2020, 2021, it's morphed a little bit into, we wanted to start, like, I came on board this project, and some other data people came on board, and we wanted to start taking data on, you know, are these garden habitats working to attract butterflies? I don't know if David Suzuki Foundation actually wanted to know the answer, but that's sort of the answer that we wanted to figure out. And so we very gently asked the people who were also getting these gardens if they would, hey, you know, could you take a photo if you see one, and if you see a butterfly, take a photo and upload it to iNaturalist. And then we provided training on that. And so if there's a bit of a nomenclature, tricky nomenclature here. So the butterflies from the Butterfly Way project that were uploaded to iNaturalist, they were uploaded onto something called the DSF BIMBY project. So from here on in, I'm going to be referring to the DSF BIMBY project, and that refers to basically all the butterflies that this DSF UBC partnership has uploaded onto iNaturalist. And I'm going to be showing you some data from that. And then last year we started something new and exciting. We asked these the butterfly volunteers in British Columbia to walk transects. And so we introduced the concept of a transect. What is it? You know, why is it important to monitor in set time intervals, and sort of the relationship between, like, effort spent on monitoring and the actual product that you're seeing. So not to, are we seeing more butterflies because we're looking more, or are we seeing butterflies because there are actually more? So it was interesting working with a lot of people who aren't scientists and this concept of transect walks, and especially with COVID on top of everything, we didn't have joint transects. So everybody just picked their own transect. It was a transect free for all. And yeah, and then we learned some things from that I'll share with you today as well. Okay, so I want to show you, is this working? How do we know if it's working? What are the metrics? So this is just a figure from iNaturalist, and I think most of you probably know what iNaturalist is. Those of you who have never worked, and I think Em is going to talk about iNaturalist later. Those of you who haven't worked on it, it's a website and an app where you can take a photo of an organism and upload it, and it gets held there. So it's like this giant repository of biodiversity photos. And what's nice about it as well is that people will look at your photo and help you identify it. If the iNat AI hasn't already identified it, other people can help you identify it. So in BC, so this is just like general iNaturalist users. And these are butterfly photos. So last year, quite a few locations, quite a few people in quite a few different locations uploaded butterfly photos. This little subset here is the DSF BIMBY group. And we also did okay. Obviously, we don't have the reach yet as far as central British Columbia or northern British Columbia, but we are definitely working on it. And we're also working on trying to harness all these people who are already doing this to come join our project and work together. So here's the data in more of a histogram. So the light blue are the general users of iNaturalist, and then the dark blue are the iNaturalist, or the DSF BIMBY. And so last year there were 48 users. So there are 48 people. We had a lot more people who joined the project, but the act of asking them to upload a photo onto iNaturalist is a huge stumbling block. And so we had 48 people who actually were able to do that. But what's interesting is that those 48 people contributed 6.5, that's about 4% of total users, and they contributed 6.5% of the iNat observations, which is good. I think it's a good step. And as you can see, this figure also shows you when in the year things were being observed. And you can see that it's pretty parallel to the DSF users are pretty much seeing butterflies and using iNaturalist at sort of the same time of year as the other users. BC is unique in that we have a really long butterfly season. So it starts in March and ends in October, and it's probably just going to keep getting longer. I haven't seen one yet, though it's pretty early. What is it, March 4th? Yeah, I haven't seen him yet. We've seen the bees are just starting to come out, so which is interesting. It seems early for bees, but, and then this really hard to read figure, each of the x-axes, each of the ticks on the x-axis is an actual butterfly species. And then you can see that, and then the y-axis is the number of observations. And so here we have the regular users and then the DSF BIMBY users. And there are approximately 200 species of butterflies in British Columbia. And what's amazing is that the iNaturalist users actually saw and photo documented 150 of these species last year, which is a great shout out to basically citizen science and iNaturalist users in general. And what was really neat too was that even though we only had 4% of the users as part of our project, we documented 32% of the species that were documented in iNaturalist. So I think that's a really good sign. We may not be getting like the total, the mass amount of observations, but we're definitely seeing among the project members, we're seeing a lot of the diversity in BC. So those are our positive steps. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the endangered species. There are 9 endangered or extirpated species in BC. I might have said 10 earlier, but it is 9. And so the regular iNaturalist users did document 6 of these 9 endangered species last year. Our group didn't see any, so this is a big fat 0 in all of these categories. But I think this is positive because we are, especially the monarch. I mean, the monarch hasn't been seen and documented in maybe like three instances of the monarch. This is the Western population of monarch. It's not the Eastern population coming over. The Western population of monarch has not been coming into the Okanagan in BC. So this is promising maybe that it is coming back to this area. Yeah, so this is, I like to talk about endangered species because I think people, general citizen scientists and general people who photograph butterflies don't really understand that their observations can actually make a difference. And so when they see that they're seeing endangered species as well, then I think it's important they see that, oh yeah, I can help, document these important species. And then, I don't know, I'm not sure timing wise how I'm doing here. Maybe I'll just check the chat. Okay.
I think if you wrap up within like the next 2 to 3 minutes, that would be ideal.
I will do that. Then, right, so this is what I said earlier. So 4% for how are we doing? 4% of the users captured 6.5% of the observations and 32% of the species. And then positive note is that in general in BC, iNaturalist users captured 75% of all butterfly diversity species. And then the transects, I mentioned this earlier, we learned a lot from the transects. I don't think they went that well. And what we learned, I'll just go right to the suggestions down here, is that people had a hard time doing this. So we need to do this in groups. We need to form a community around it. We need to have experts within each of those communities that are walking transects together. So that's what we're going to do moving forward. We did have 150 transects walk. We monitored, we saw 20 species. And so for now, what we're doing is we're recruiting for this year, 2022. If the name has changed slightly again, now it's called the Great BC Butterfly Search. And the goal is to attract 1,000 members to photograph butterflies and 100 transect walkers. And then for the same reasons as we've talked about before, basically we're really wanting to monitor butterflies, who's doing well, who isn't doing well. And this one I think is especially important, empowering everyday people to engage with biodiversity. We also have a huge schools branch to this that I've not talked about. We have hundreds and hundreds of elementary school students and secondary students who are involved, and we give them training and support to get them out and documenting butterflies. And then a couple of slides just to wrap up. In case you're trying to do something like this too, it's very difficult to photograph butterflies, and general people find that really frustrating. So we need to do something about this year. Maybe, for example, if the butterfly comes but flies away, it's important. Maybe you can photograph the plant that it landed on instead, so we know get some more information about plant-insect interactions. iNaturalist can be hard for people. What's positive is that we have a lot of interest in this, and so people are wanting to help and they're looking for opportunities. It's a very good teaching tool. I use this example all the time in my population ecology unit. How many butterflies are there? Counting is not hard, but counting entire populations and enumerating species diversity is extremely difficult. And then finally, the media is very, very engaged in these types of projects. And so it's important that we keep the messaging clear. And then I get asked a lot of how does this fit into your own research program? And I talk a lot about my work involves some stuff on urban insect conservation and sort of thinking about insect diversity in general. So these are some of the questions that we can ask with this type of data. But I think maybe more importantly is, for me anyway, is that what we're doing sort of on the community aspect. And we're really thinking more about, how do we do this well? We have thousands of volunteers. We don't want to waste their time. and you want to get the best data out. So how do we do that? And there are other citizen science projects out there. So how do we not reinvent the wheel? And then this one is a statistical thing right here, accurate estimate of absences in iNaturalist data. And then just to end here, I think these 4 things are the reason why I continue to work with this project. It doesn't get me any publications, that's for sure, at least not yet. But I think what's important is that it's demystifying the process of science. It's getting biodiversity science out of the ivory tower where it's currently locked. It's empowering people from all walks of life to engage with biodiversity, and it's making ecology and applied ecology accessible from like kindergartners all the way to retirees. So that's, to me, that's the best part of this whole thing. And then I like to thank the butterflies for letting me chase after them year after year, taking pictures. The conference organizers today and my collaborators and like the classes that I teach, the undergrads give me a lot of feedback on this. This project is ridiculous. My lab, and then funding for, sometimes I use my insert funding to pay for undergrads to help us with this. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah, so if there's time, I can take questions, but if not, I can wait till the end of the session as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for doing this work and for that presentation and for going first in this session. I do think we have time for one question, and then we'll save the remainder of the questions for that general session. So does someone want to ask a question? I guess I will. Oh, no, we have lots of questions, so I will not ask a question. We'll go with, now I'm only seeing Melanie. So Melanie, go ahead with your question.
I was actually just going to say, Kirsten, you can totally go first.
Mine is super quick. I'm just curious if the observations that you used were all observations or if you filtered for research grade ones.
Yeah, the data that I showed you today were filtered for research grade.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you so much. That's it.
And we'll save the remainder of the questions for the general session. Thank you again. That was great. So next up is Dr. Emily Choi, who is an ecologist and postdoctoral researcher at McGill University, who's studying Arctic seabirds. She also has extensive experience in science communication and outreach, and has a bachelor's of education in outdoors and experiential learning. Today, she will be talking about her past PhD work, which used a community-based monitoring program. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, great. So for today, I'm going to be talking a bit about my PhD work, where I worked with communities in the New Development region to monitor beluga whales as sentinels of environmental change. And I'd just like to say to begin that although I'll be presenting my PhD research, it was part of a larger collaborative project with partnerships across northern communities, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and several universities. Now, there are several characteristics that make beluga whales an ideal sentinel species for monitoring Arctic change. They're the most abundant toothed whale with a circumpolar distribution, so they're found across the Arctic. They're highly specialized for Arctic environments. For example, they lack a dorsal fin, which helps them to navigate under sea ice. They're long-lived with a low reproductive rate. For example, some of the whales within my study population live beyond 60 years of age, and females will have 1, sometimes 2 calves every 3 years. And they use many different habitats. They'll use sea ice habitat, offshore habitat, coastal and open water habitat, which is important for monitoring a complex ecosystem such as the Beaufort. Now, specifically, the Beaufort Sea beluga population is one of Canada's largest, with an estimated 40,000 individuals. Beluga whales will spend their summer in the Canadian Beaufort Sea, so they'll arrive around late May to early June. The females will give birth to calves in early July in the warmer waters of the Mackenzie River estuary. The whales will spend their summer feeding in the Amundsen Gulf before returning to their winter habitat in the Bering Sea around late September to early October. They also have a strong habitat association with sea ice. So males and females are sexually dimorphic, and it's the large males that tend to select offshore pack ice, whereas females with young calves and smaller whales will tend to select more open water habitat near the mainland.
Hey, Emily, I'm just going to stop you right there. So I think we're not seeing the slides as you are. We're kind of stuck in the first title page.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to try
No worries.
resharing my screen. Let's just see. Has the slide changed?
That's much better. That's perfect.
Okay. So I was just here. So the Beaufort sea beluga population is one of Canada's largest, with an estimated 40,000 individuals. So they have a strong habitat association with sea ice. So large males tend to select offshore pack ice, whereas younger whales and females with young calves tend to select open water habitat near the mainland. And they're also prolific divers. So Beaufort sea beluga whales have been tagged to dive between 400 to 900 meters, sometimes over 1,000 meters. And it tends to be the larger males that make these dives, which are believed to be for foraging purposes. And finally, they are an important traditional food to communities across the Arctic. Now, recently, there was a 20-year decline in inferred growth rates within the Beaufort sea beluga population. So from about 1988 to 2008, beluga whales were getting smaller with age. Now, this decline is believed to be due to environmental change within the Beaufort Sea. And one of the questions I had as a PhD student was, could this impact diving ability? Because in toothed whales, the bigger you are, the deeper you dive. So there's a strong association between body size and dive depth for Arctic odontocetes. So why is bigger better in terms of diving? Well, it all has to do with how oxygen stores scale with body size in elite diving mammals. So if you're an elite diving mammal, you'll store most of your oxygen in your blood. You'll have large blood volumes, and you'll have high concentrations of an oxygen transport protein known as hemoglobin. Secondly, you'll store your next largest oxygen stores in your muscle. So you'll have a large muscle mass and a high concentration of an oxygen storage protein known as myoglobin. And lastly, unlike us, you'll store the least amount of oxygen in your lungs. So having large lungs is a bit of a liability when you're diving over 1,000 meters. You might suffer from the bends or decompression sickness. So elite diving mammals will have small lungs relative to their body size and will actually collapse their lungs upon descent. Now, if you know the concentration of oxygen in these three tissues and their relative volume, you can estimate the total body oxygen stores within a marine mammal. Now, if you divide this by the metabolic rate, which you can estimate through allometric equations based on body mass, you can estimate the aerobic dive limit, or the theoretical time a marine mammal can dive with oxygen. So the overall objective for this part of my research was to get baseline information on the dive physiology of the whales by examining, measuring physiological parameters of oxygen stores and examining the relationship with body condition and body mass to determine whether declines in growth rates could impact foraging. And this research was published in 2019 in the Journal of Experimental Biology. And this research took place in the Nunavut settlement region of the Northwest Territories. And I spent my summer on Kendall Island, just off the coast of Tuktoyaktuk. But I worked with several harvesting camps within the region. So this work was part of a community-based monitoring program in partnership with Inuvialuit communities in the Northwest Territories. So this beluga whales are an important traditional food. They have been for many years. So every year there is a hunt in which a small number of whales is taken from the population. And this hunt has been found to have no impacts on the demographics of the whales. So the whale population is currently healthy and stable. And this program has been is co-managed by the Fisheries and Joint Management Committee, as well as Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and has been running since the 1980s. Beluga meat is extremely nutritious. Muktuk or blubber is high in vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin E, as well as omega-3 fatty acids. And there have been many studies that have shown that country and other traditional foods are much more nutritious than store-bought foods, which are often expired by the time they reach the Arctic and extremely expensive. So this is a collaborative project or program with communities in the north. The communities are very concerned with the welfare of their whales and the impacts of climate change. There's a lot of co-production of knowledge. For example, that decline in growth rates that I showed, before that was even published, the community members had been telling scientists that the whales were getting smaller. And finally, if it wasn't for this program, we wouldn't know as much about the Beaufort Sea beluga population as we do today, and I would not have had any samples for my thesis. So just to give you a sense of how this partnership works, in each of the hunting areas, there is a beluga monitor, and it's the job of the beluga monitor to keep track of the numbers of whales harvested, take basic measurements, as well as a subset of sample for health analysis. And so basically what will happen is when a hunter lands a whale, the beluga monitor would meet them at their campsite and basically take measurements of the whale that had been harvested. And the research team that I was a part of would work with the beluga monitor. So in this picture, this is beluga monitor John Day and myself measuring the length of the whale. They'll also measure the girth, the blubber thickness, the sex of the whale. And then after the beluga monitor has taken their measurements, then the families of the hunters will start to cut up the whale for their food. And it's usually at this point that I will ask permission to take a tissue sample for my research. So the community members mostly consume the blubber or muktuk. So this is a picture of blubber or muktuk being dried out in the sun. And they also consume the mussel or nitku, which means dry meat. So this is nitku or dry meat being dried, as well as dry fish. So when I lived with the communities, I would eat mostly traditional foods with them as well. But it's thanks to this wonderful partnership that I was able to acquire almost 200 tissue samples from my work on beluga diet and almost 80 tissue samples from my work on beluga dive physiology. So I was able to measure the following physiological parameters in 77 whales: blood, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. Hematocrit is a measure of blood cells in a given volume. Myoglobin and buffering capacity in the latissimus dorsi muscle. So the latissimus is the main diving muscle of marine mammals. It runs along the back. And buffering capacity is a measure of how well the muscle will function under anaerobic conditions. And contracted spleen mass. And then I used linear models to examine the relationship of these parameters with body mass, condition, and several biological factors. And I estimated the total body oxygen stores of individual whales, as well as aerobic dive limits for information of how long they can dive. So in terms of a body condition index, I used two. First was a body condition index based on the residuals of a model fitted to maximum half girth. So this model had been, our condition indice had been used before in bowhead whales. And I had used this in a previous paper in beluga whales, and I compared it to other body condition indices and found that this condition index was most strongly associated with the biomass of Arctic cod, which is the main prey of beluga whales, as well as dietary tracers associated with cod. In addition, I also used a second condition index, maximum half girth to length ratio, which is a more common condition index used in mammals. So in terms of my results, I found that beluga whales have one of the highest myoglobin concentrations of all marine mammals. They have high hemoglobin concentrations, and they have a fairly high buffering capacity. So they're an endurance swimmer. And when I compared these values to other marine mammals in the literature, I found that they were most similar to the narwhal. In addition, I also sequenced the myoglobin gene of beluga whales and found that there was a 99% similarity in coding sequence to narwhal, which is no surprise, they're from the same family. But Dr. Terry Williams has done a lot of work on narwhal diving, narwhal physiology, and believes because narwhal are extremely specialized, so they can dive well over 1,000 meters. They're extremely slow endurance swimmers. They're highly specialized to sea ice, but because they're so specialized, they're particularly sensitive and vulnerable to rapid change. So based on these results, we believe that beluga dive physiology is more similar to narwhal than previously anticipated, which may make them sensitive to rapid Arctic change. Now, in terms of my best models for blood oxygen storage parameters, I found that body condition and both indices modeled separately was the most significant predictor of blood oxygen stores. So these were my best models for hematocrit and hemoglobin. And overall, I found that the whales with the highest condition also had the highest percent hematocrit and highest hemoglobin concentrations. Similarly, for myoglobin, I found that body condition alone best predicted muscle myoglobin. And overall, I found that whales with higher condition also had higher myoglobin concentrations. But I found that the buffering capacity was best fitted by a null model. But buffering capacity is an indication of endurance, not oxygen storage. Now, one of the questions we had was, because we found these strong relationships between body condition and muscle and blood oxygen storage parameters, could this impact total body oxygen stores? So what we did was we estimated the total body oxygen stores for each of the individual whales. But to look at the impact of body condition alone, we controlled for body mass. So we assumed that the whales were all the same body mass. So we used the average body mass to make these calculations. In addition, we compared the total oxygen stores of the whale with the highest condition to the whale with the lowest condition, assuming they had the same body mass. What we found was that the beluga whale with the lowest body condition index had 12% lower muscle oxygen stores, 27% lower blood oxygen stores, which equated to about a 3-minute difference in dive time in comparison to the whale with the highest body condition. And this estimate is very conservative because in reality, they don't have the same body mass. But based on these results, we concluded that the impact of body condition on muscle and blood oxygen stores are additive and may affect diving ability. Now, how does this impact foraging ability? Well, it all has to do with the different habitat associations of fish in the Beaufort Sea. So there's different fish communities based on the nearshore and offshore environment, but also with depth, in particular with the main prey of Beaufort Sea beluga whales, Arctic cod. So Arctic cod are found at their greatest biomass between 300 and 500 meters, but Arctic cod also display a very significant size depth gradient. So young of the year Arctic cod tend to be near the surface of the water column at the shallowest depths, whereas the older, larger Arctic cod tend to be at the greater depths. So based on these habitat associations, we believe that beluga whales with poor condition and lower oxygen stores may not be able to access the largest and greatest biomass of Arctic cod. In summary, so Arctic belugas are specialized for prolonged diving and navigating under sea ice, similar to narwhal. And declines in body condition may affect oxygen stores in belugas. Therefore, whales in better physical condition may perform better under stressful circumstances, such as evading predators and ice entrapments. And finally, we believe that this could be a vicious cycle in which declines in body condition in beluga whales caused by changes in prey availability could impact the dive time of the whales, which would impact their ability to capture their prey, which would further worsen their condition. So in terms of acknowledgements, I would like to thank the organizers of the Ecological Science Communications Conference for inviting me to give this talk. And of course, I would like to thank the community members, Hank and Sarah Rogers and in Inuvik for hosting me for about 4 summers, as well as the beluga monitors, community members and assistants. The local northern organizations such as the Hunters and Trappers Committee for their support, as well as my supervisors and co-authors. And finally, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I would be more than happy to answer any of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think for timing, we will save the questions until the general question round. But I just wanted to note that our first talk did show how community outreach, like engaging your research with the community, can help others, whereas this one really focused on how that can enhance our own research. So thank you so much for that. An undergraduate at Dalhousie University, Unity Cooper, who has extensive outreach experience through her work with several conservation organizations, including CPAWS and currently Nature Nova Scotia. So take it away, Unity Cooper.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, be a part of Diversity of Nature, Ecological Science Communication Conference. I want to share with you all a really great conservation success story that led to an amazing grassroots movement that I worked on. So again, like Suchanta said, my name is Unity Cooper. I'm a fourth year biology and neuroscience student at Dalhousie. I have always been interested in nature conservation and human development. I am the education and outreach assistant at Nature Nova Scotia. We are a federation of Nova Scotia naturalists that focus areas include protected areas, wildlife, urban nature, species at risk, and sustainable forestry. I started working with Nature Nova Scotia last year, and I'm currently working on the project to make Halifax a more bird-friendly city. I also do youth and community outreach and work specifically with BACPOC communities. Prior to working with Nature Nova Scotia, I got the opportunity to do a summer internship as a conservation assistant with the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, the Nova Scotia chapter. And I work on CPAWS, the Nova Scotia chapter terrestrial campaigns, creating more parks and protected areas across Nova Scotia. I work on a few different campaigns, including Blue Mountain Bridge Cove Lakes Wilderness Area in Halifax and Owl's Head Provincial Park Reserve, which is what my presentation is about. Some of you folks here today may have heard about Owl's Head and the scandals in the newspaper. Melanie, we could go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, well, before I dive in, I want to acknowledge that I'm delivering this presentation, and I am sure many of you may be listening in MacPhee, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I think it is really important to recognize the role the Mi'kmaq people have had in stewarding and caring for these lands and waters we're talking about today for generations before us, and also how integral the role is in leading conservation efforts now and in the future. Next slide, thank you. This is a photo of Owl's Head. It's an aerial shot, and it's a spectacular coastline. You can get a glimpse of the bedrock ridges along the coastal headlands and the eastern shore islands just spotted off in the distance. It's a beautiful place. And this is a map of Nova Scotia, and this map pinpoints where Owl's Head is in the province. Owl's Head is located on the eastern shore. It's in the community of Little Harbor, which is close to Clam Harbor and Town Tanger. It's about 1.5 hours to 2 hours drive outside of Halifax. This is a map of the provincial park reserve boundary as it was originally proposed. So Owl's Head covers about 285 hectares of this coastal headlands on the eastern shore. So this can give you an idea of what it looks like. So I'll take a few minutes here to tell you about the history of Owl's Head. It was actually created as a park in 1970. On the right here, you can see the front page of the Mail Star. In December of 1973, on the front page of the Mail Star, they announced the creation of the Eastern Shore Sea Park system, which include Owl's Head on the map. So Owl's Head is not a tentative protected area, as you may have heard. In fact, it actually been considered to be managed as a park for over half a century. And this kind of just showed that Owl's Head have really been a park for a long, long time, which for a while was in question because the government was trying to say it wasn't really a park, but it was in the newspaper and it was publicly announced. The only difference is that it never received the legal protection the government promised to it. So in 2013, the conservation significance of Owl's Head was reaffirmed when it was included in the Nova Scotia Parks and Protected Areas Plan. So this is a plan that's still being implemented today. It essentially identifies the most ecologically significant sites across Nova Scotia and moves them towards legal protection. So by Owl's Head being included, the government was committing to legally protecting Owl's Head. But then the government did not keep their promise at the time. So in January of 2019, the Nova Scotia government secretly delisted Owl's Head. They took it off the parks plan, and they did this in order to sell off the public lands to a developer to develop a golf course. They didn't tell anybody about it. There was no public consultation, no public notice. It was a decision made completely in secret behind closed doors. Then in December 2019, the story finally broke. The public found out when the CBC's Michael Gorman wrote the article and told the public about the delisting and the pending land sale. The public was really outraged by this decision, and this sparked a public outcry that was well organized online. And that's when the Facebook group Save Owl's Head was created. And it was a way for people to get involved and talk about this issue. It's now about, I think the Facebook group got about 10,000 members now. So this is definitely a topic people are very passionate about. And CPAWS helped amplify this issue to reach bigger audience. We supported the movement, and this led to an amazing big grassroots movement and local advocacy. Save Our Head group and some local groups protested outside the province house and even launched a lawsuit against the government for delisting Owl's Head. And this have been going on for about 2 years now. There has been constant pressure from the community on the government. In May 2020, there was a FOIPOP. So this was essentially some internal documents that came out under the Freedom of Information Act. One of them was an independent assessment of the lands at Owl's Head. Essentially, this document showed that Owl's Head, that the best and highest use for these lands at Owl's Head was for conservation and recreational purposes. And this report was shared with the government. It was shared with the developers. So everybody knew essentially that this area of land was important for conservation. And that's the only thing it should be used for. But the government still went ahead with the land sale agreement. Where are we now? So fast forward to November 2021, there was a change in government. The developer resented their letter of offer and backed out from their agreement with the Nova Scotia government. So that essentially removed the threat of a golf course being built and the land being sold off at Owl's Head. And in January 2022, the Nova Scotia government finally recommitted to protecting Owl's Head. So these are two really big steps that we have been waiting for a very long time, after lots and lots of work by the community and by NGOs like Nature Nova Scotia and CPAWS. We have been able to save Owl's Head. So a little bit of why Owl's Head is so important. It contains a large diversity of ecosystem, predominantly coastal barrens. So you can see coastal barrens are highlighted in the gray on this map. These are ecosystems with low-lying vegetation, not very much tree cover, and lots of exposed bedrock ridges like we saw in the aerial shot. There is also pockets of temperate rainforest. So something very few people know in Nova Scotia, that we actually have rainforests here. But this part of the Eastern Shore, there's so much fog and rain that ecologically speaking, these forests are considered to be rainforests. So that's another unique feature of Owl's Head. There's also a number of wetlands there, swamp, bugs, also beaches, salt marshes, ponds, and lakes. And all of these different ecosystems support a variety of species. So the St. Mary's University EPIC Lab has done a fair amount of work out here on studying plants communities. They identify over 70 different types of vascular plants and 10 types of non-vascular plants during their fieldwork. They also identify a global rare plant community called Brome Crowberry Coastal Draft Heathland Plant Community. It's a bit of a tongue twister. But essentially, this plant community can be found on the crest of the bedrock ridges at Owl's Head. And it got such a limited range, it's very rare to find outside of Nova Scotia, and that is considered to be globally rare. There are a number of other species of conservation concerns that can find habitat here, including bird species like brown swallow, which are provincially endangered, also common elders and ruby crown kinglets. 92 bird species was also identified based on visual and audio, and this was the result from CPAWS terrestrial and coastal survey conducted. CPAWS also partner, oh, sorry, Melanie. Yeah, I'm still on this slide. CPAWS also partnered with Dow to conduct an underwater eelgrass survey that was done along the coast of Owl's Head. And measurements like shoot density, canopy cover, the height of different eelgrass blades was taken, and this data was collected to see how healthy these eelgrass beds were. I did some data analysis on the data collected, and we realized that the beds are in good health. So this just goes to show the importance of the marine ecosystem at Owl's Head. This important ecosystem is a nursery habitat for juvenile fish, commercial species, the Atlantic cod, and lobster, and it needs to be protected so we can continue to do research and learn and understand more about our marine environment. So some other reason why Owl's Head is so important is that Owl's Head is a public land on the coastline in Nova Scotia. And very little of Nova Scotia coastline is actually publicly owned. Even less is protected. Most coastlines is privately owned. I think it's less than 5% of Nova Scotia coastline, which is publicly owned and protected. So really in this regards, Owl's Head is really unique and definitely worth keeping under public ownership and protecting for conservation. Owl's Head also acts as a gateway to the Eastern Shore's islands. This is the largest collection of islands in Eastern North America. So it's a very special place, and Owl's Head is very closely linked to it. So CPAWS spent a lot of time on Owl's Head because we've been quite keen to contribute to this growing body of knowledge about the biodiversity that can be found here and the species that rely on these great coastal headlands for habitat. One of my favorite field experiences with sea paws during my summer is when we went kayaking and we saw a leatherback sea turtle. Check out this video of the Sea Paws Nova Scotia sea kayak expedition to Owl's Head earlier last year, where we observed an endangered leatherback sea turtle. So I'm just going to share Melanie and show the video.
Oh, am I sharing my browser right now?
You are, but I think it allows me to share. Can you guys see the video? Can we see the video?
Yeah, I can see the video from your screen.
Leatherback sea turtle right here on Owl's Head. This is amazing. Hi everyone, the Sea Paws team is out exploring Owl's Head today by kayak. We're going to start at Little Harbor Wharf and work our way around to Owl's Head Wharf. In the meantime, we'll explore Long Cove in the Provincial Park and also go check out the federal property with the lighthouse. So follow along on our adventure today. Owl's Head is a provincial park reserve on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. It's home to coastal barren and wetland ecosystems, habitat for species at risk. It's a gateway to the 100 wild islands. However, the Nova Scotia government delisted this park in 2019 in order to sell off these public lands for golf course development. This is a site that's been identified for conservation for over 50 years, and there are lots of good people working to make sure it's protected. Federal property at Owl's Head. This site contains a lighthouse. It's also got a number of ecological features. This federal property was actually once at risk of being sold off to the golf course development along with Owl's Head Provincial Park. But thankfully, when the federal government learned of the scandal surrounding Owl's Head, they backed out of that deal and they've redirected this parcel towards conservation, which is really good news. So we're here today to assess the ecological features of this site and just explore a little bit.
Hey, Unity, for timing, would it be possible to wrap up the video maybe?
Yeah. Everyone here can help support our movement by getting involved by following Nature Nova Scotia and Sea Paws on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and also by visiting our website and signing up for our Seek Action Alert.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Unity. And do hear from our next speaker, Dr. Dalal Hanna, who is a postdoctoral ecologist at Carleton University. She is also the co-founder of Riparia, which is an organization I've been following for a long time, which aims to connect women and other underrepresented audience to the water. So take it away, Dr. Dalal Hanna.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all today. You know, it's always a big pleasure for me to get the chance to speak about Riparia, the Canadian charity that I co-founded that works to create better connections between young women and science on the water. But before we dive in, I do want to spend a little bit of time just acknowledging my two Riparia co-founders, Dr. Andrea Reed and Michaela Wujek, without whom Riparia could not exist. Also, parts of the talk that I will be giving today were actually prepared by Dr. Reed. So what is Riparia? Well, we're an organization that seeks to motivate and inspire diverse young women to enjoy and protect freshwaters and the outdoors. My co-founders and I were drawn towards this mission because we know just how much freshwaters matter. Not only do these incredible habitats provide provide us with essential ecosystem services upon which we all rely, like drinking water, food. But they're also places that we can go to experience a connection to land and to nature. And that connection is really important. In fact, there's a large body of research showing positive benefits of interactions with nature, spanning from emotional to mental to physical to spiritual ones. And there are many ways to help foster these types of connections. Engaging with something often called land-based learning is one important method. But what exactly do I mean by land-based learning? Well, this approach recognized that the best place to learn about the river, for example, is on and from the river. And land-based learning isn't new. People have been learning from the land since time immemorial. But today, so much of our formal education system happens between four walls. Land-based learning reminds us to think of learning opportunities as one that emerged from the rhythms of daily life and the places that we're in or wanting to learn about. And this is why Riparia offers free land and water-based programming. We believe that by bringing youth to the places where water flows, taking time to be both in them while sharing and exchanging knowledge, we can help impart a lifetime of love and understanding of freshwaters. And nurturing that love and understanding is critical, especially now as freshwaters face increasing threats. So this is a photo of the type of what that type of learning can look like, taken on Riparia's very first program, which we offered back in 2019. And I'm scratched down in a small stream among 10 young women looking at the incredible insects that live in that stream bed, discussing what they tell us about the habitat that we're in. Here, I also want to take a moment to challenge us to think critically about what it means to engage in land-based learning. Does this necessitate that we leave the city to enter the so-called wilderness for it to be effective? Absolutely not. Nature and people are not separate. This idea that we need to go to nature, that we don't always live and exist embedded in and affected by and continually impacted by our surroundings, is one that doesn't resonate with me. It reminds me of words by Gary Cooper, in fact. Nature is not a place to visit, it is home. And for most people on the planet, home is a city, like Toronto, pictured here, which is Canada's most populated city. But cities too are part of nature, and this painting by Sajida Hussain reminds me of that. As you look over the mighty glistening water of Lake Ontario, one of the world's largest water bodies, which borders Toronto, this massive city. And in the city of Montreal, where I currently live on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Mohawk, soon dandelions are going to start popping up all over the place through the sidewalk cracks, reminding me of my connection to land, even when I am in the city. And so when thinking of fostering connection between people and nature or land, there's a real need to meet people where they're at, for individuals to be able to access this transformative type of learning from wherever they are, geographically, yes, as well as socioeconomically. Many programs in Canada and the United States that get youth out on the land for extended periods of time tend to privilege those that can afford to get themselves to remote parts of the country, who can pay often exorbitant amounts for these unique experiences, who can afford not to be working, who can afford to volunteer, who can afford to be away and to not be there to help their families. And so who can access these experiences as a result of these realities is a very important question to unpack and address. And this is why with Riparia, all the programming we offer is completely free. But how exactly do we fit into this movement toward land-based learning? Well, our name Riparia in Latin refers to existing alongside a river. The riparian zone, as the scientists here today will likely know, is the interface between land and a river, or land and water. And we chose this particular name because what we do is fundamentally at the interface of different worlds coming together, of bringing together non-Indigenous, Indigenous youth so they can learn in tandem from one another. It's about bringing together Indigenous and Western sciences so we can better and more holistically understand freshwaters, assess their health, and learn to protect them. And we're also bringing inner city youth into rural areas, or we're helping them find that connection to land where they live. Our mission is to motivate and inspire young women to enjoy and protect freshwaters and the outdoors. Our vision is that youth participate in our programs will grow a lifetime of love and understanding of freshwaters. And our focus is on youth who would otherwise not be able to access or afford this kind of learning experience. This particular focus on freshwaters is important on so many different levels. In Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, clean drinking water or clean running rivers are by no means a guarantee. We're at this disturbing point in time where surface waters and groundwaters are being commodified and sold to the highest bidder, while these communities that I mentioned need to cart in bottled water from the outside, need to ration what they can consume and when, and need to rinse the river off when they swim or fish out of concern for what is in the water. Freshwater biodiversity is declining around the world at alarming rates, and we very much need to take collective action now to bend the curve. But so much of this is happening below the water's surface and out of sight, out of mind. So we need a next generation who sees the importance of the interconnections between all life and is ready to work for and uphold its protection. And this is the precise intersection that Riparia sits at, bringing life to freshwater learning opportunities on the water, offering land-based learning to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous young women who have important roles to play in maintaining future freshwater health and protection. We offer programs that feature land as a teacher, that center relationships, that cultivate holistic perspectives, that treat the land as a place of reflection, and offer a means to decolonize science and indigenize education. We actively confront tensions around the urban-rural dichotomy, the false separateness between people and nature, between different ways of knowing and doing science, and the need to confront who can participate in and access this type of programming. In the city, we run day camps that connect young women with water by deepening their appreciation and cross-cultural understanding of freshwaters within an urban setting, and inspire them to take action as local water protectors. So our 4-day urban program based out of Montreal includes immersive water-based activities and teachings where youth learn about threats to healthy water and critically reflect on the root causes and solutions. And our team of co-founders and staffs introduces methods and tools that we use as scientists to understand, monitor, and protect water all around us. Like, for example, underwater drones, which we're really excited to be using here, or telemetry antennas to track fish movement, and portable microscopes to look at insects found in streams. We also open up fish to learn about their inner workings before enjoying the gift of their flesh as a meal, and spend time building important outdoor skills like navigation and paddling. And youth learn from local Indigenous knowledge keepers during our programming, as well as the water bodies that they interact with, as a way to help them engage with multiple ways of knowing. Our multidisciplinary team of co-founders that have backgrounds engaging in both Western and Indigenous science fundamentally believe in the importance of expanding science beyond the ways predominantly practiced in Western education systems. We believe in engaging with multiple ways of knowing, also sometimes thought of as two-eyed seeing, which refers to learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and learning to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. So by nurturing curiosity, creativity, personal strengths, and play, we support youth in strengthening those reciprocal relationships to self, to others, and to water. We are reminded and guided by words like those of Dr. Wabinwal Kimmer that said, "Action on behalf of life transforms." Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. Outside the city, we run week-long paddling trips that do much of the same thing as our day camps, but in a fully immersive, beautiful week free of phones, internet, and showers. We transport all our gear, food, sampling equipment, and more via canoe for the whole week. And together we gather information about our surroundings and begin to build longitudinal data sets where we can examine changes in freshwater health over time and space through our programs. We build up our toolbox, so to speak, for assessing the health of freshwaters and critically reflect on how both biological and cultural indicators of health might come to inform this understanding. So by pairing, water teachings, with freshwater sampling techniques, for example, we're aspiring to support youth to be strong like two people, as envisioned with the two-eyed seeing approaches. And we've seen transformative outcomes as a result. This figure shows youth self-assessment. Here, I'll just get rid of this. I see that you're seeing this on your screen now. This figure shows youth self-assessment of their level of knowledge or comfort across a variety of axes before this experience. And these pre-trip assessments show this kind of central distribution, meaning that a number of participants in our programming didn't have particularly high confidence or working knowledge in these areas before joining us. And this figure shows post-trip assessments, which you can see really shift dramatically in a positive direction following participation in our programming. And these outcomes are supported through statements shared by youth, which say far more than numbers on a figure. Take, for example, this 16-year-old from the Mohawk community of Yanawage who said, "What I really loved about the expedition is all the activities we did. We tested water quality, which I don't think I would have had the chance to do anywhere else. And I thought it was truly amazing because water is the most important thing. It's the thing we all have in common. We all need water." Youth are also sent home from our programs with gear and sampling equipment so they can continue to enjoy the outdoors, be safe on the land, and continue to protect water where they are beyond our program. With assistance from our educational partners at the New Frontiers School Board in Montreal, we now have accredited our programming as of last summer, effectively making clear that this land-based learning opportunity holds just as much value as the experience gained in formal classroom settings. So we take time and space during our programs to recognize that these youth have paid to be here. Even if there's no financial cost to their participation, they've taken time away from family life, from jobs, they've taken a risk, ventured outside their comfort zones. So from our operating budget, we also set aside honoraria for these youth so we can recognize these contributions and their commitments. And we express our thanks to the youth while having really frank conversations about existing wage gaps and continued sexism that exist to this day in Canada, as well as many other countries. And I share these details of our approach to land-based learning because it is the responsibility I carry and the experience I know. Riparia is, however, not alone in its approaches or ambitions, as made clear by this recent review of 50 articles on these subjects centered on Turtle Island. And that's just what's available in published literature. So communities and urban Indigenous people across North America and elsewhere are actively creating contexts in which the land can once again be treated as a source of knowledge, transforming our relationships and improving our understanding of how to respect and uphold our responsibilities to land and, of course, to water. So what does this mean for you? Well, it's my conviction that we all have a role to play in this work, whether we are ourselves educators, if we have young people in our lives, if we're scientists or researchers. We're all accountable to the system that we're part of, and we can all have a hand in improving it for learners if that's an outcome we want. To do that, we can draw inspiration from the multitude of programs popping up. We can find out from those happening locally what we can do to support them, whether that be financially, materially, or by actually getting involved, or perhaps even by starting something up in partnership with communities and groups as appropriate. And there are a number of great resources to help make that possible. So I'm sharing a few here that you're welcome to take a look at after. Thinking of, for example, the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness that has created this document called Making Indigenous-Led Education a Public Policy Priority. Talks about the benefits of land-based learning. And then the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario that has, this great report on tools for self-learning. So I'll wrap this up by sharing that if you're interested in supporting Riparia or spreading word about Riparia, please visit our website for more information or to make a donation. Any contributions here will go directly and fully to supporting our programming and the training of inspiring our next generation of water protectors. In conclusion, I just want to extend my sincere thanks to the many who fund, sponsor, support, and partner with us to make the work that we do at Riparia possible. And I would, of course, like to thank my co-founders and Riparia staff, without whom nothing that I've shared today would be possible, as well as the youth for being so incredible and making all this worthwhile. And thank you all for being here. I will now.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation, and I love all the work that you guys do.
Sorry, just more of a comment. I just absolutely loved hearing about the initiative that you've started. It's so inspiring. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about any sort of like anecdotes or feedback that you've gotten from the youth that have participated?
Oh, well, it's been overwhelmingly positive. Our program is really thought out to try and be like as intentional as possible. So we spend a lot of time at the start kind of setting it up and trying to create a strong atmosphere of connectivity among the youth. In that first and last day, there's a lot of kind of guided talking sessions and hosting sit spots for reflective periods. And I think that really helps. We will be publishing some videos shortly that we'll share that are like kind of youth centered, and they'll share the youth's voices. But I mean, overwhelmingly, the feedback has been really good. I think that the youth, it sort of depends on the program. In the city, there's a huge kind of appreciation for visiting spots that are so close to their home that they may never have visited before or know about. In our urban day camp program, we spent a day kayak rafting on the St. Lawrence, and for all participants last year, many of them had never paddled a boat before, and so that was like, overwhelmingly exciting. And sending them home with the water sampling kits is really cool. We're partnered with Water Rangers, which is a Canada-wide organization that does water sampling. It's really cool to see the youth engage like from month to month after the program. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll ask a question as well if no one else has any questions. I was just wondering, do you have a training program within your organization for people leading the events as well?
So we have a grandmothering system. We haven't actually had, as of now, we've had very few guides working on our programs because our main guides have been our co-founders and then people recruited through a partner organization called Boreal River that takes care of more of the expedition side of things. And so their guides are kind of trained in their own ways, but that's not something we've envisioned doing. Our system has been to design a grandmothering program. So for example, last summer, we had a new guide join us, and she's committed to joining us for the next 3 summers at the very least. And so our way of ensuring that the program kind of maintains its quality through time is that there's no context in which someone would be an independent guide of a program without having previously attended a program with other guides. And that's a system that we've chosen to put into place to maintain the quality and atmosphere we've tried to design in the program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. If we don't have any more questions, we will thank again Dr. Dalal Hanna for your amazing speech. Thank you so much. That was very inspiring.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm sorry I have to chime out early.
No worries. Thank you. Okay, so last but definitely not least for this session is Em Lim, who is a graduate student at Simon Fraser University, who will be talking to us a little bit more about the utility of iNaturalist for effective science communication and outreach.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. So as you mentioned, I'm a grad student at Simon Fraser University, which means I'm coming to you from so-called Vancouver in British Columbia on the West Coast. Shout out to all of us that got up at 6 this morning. And currently Vancouver is situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations. So Michelle Tseng already gave a lot of great examples of ways that iNaturalist can be used, and I'm really excited to talk more about this app that I am frankly pretty obsessed with. And because I'm coming to you from British Columbia, I'll be featuring lots of huge critters from marine waters and issuing a bit of a challenge to the East Coasters at the end. So I think about iNaturalist sort of like real life Pokemon Go. The premise is basically that you can take a photo of any living organism, be it a plant, animal, seaweed, fungus, anything that you encounter, cities, urban areas, rural places, anywhere. And you can upload these observations to the app, and attached to your photos is typically some data, including the time and location that you took the photo, as well as the location. So there's some information about not just the photo of the animal or the plant, but also where it came from. And then you can try to identify the creature yourself and also get help from the app and from other scientists and other community members who are helping to weigh in and helping you figure out what exactly you're seeing.
Create, accelerate learning.
And so one of the benefits, I think, of iNaturalist is this ability to help identify and help crowdsource identification. So I would like to try doing a mini crowdsourced identification of this next thing. So this is a photo that I took in British Columbia. And I would love if folks could type in the chat what your best guess at what this thing is. And if you don't know the specific species, maybe the type of thing it might be, whether it's an animal or plant, as rough or as broad as you want to make it. I'd love to see if we can maybe try to crowdsource an identification. So I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in. Anemone, anemone, someone mentioned. Let's see if we can get a little bit more specific than anemone. Does anyone know the specific kind of anemone that we might have seen? So someone's guessed the green surf anemone. That's close. It's in the same genus, but it's not exactly correct. This is also, I'm understanding, a West Coast species, and a lot of you are from the East Coast. So I understand if you don't, maybe aren't super familiar with the species. I'll give you a few more seconds to get in any last guesses. I'm excited that a lot of folks knew that it was an anemone, though. That makes me really happy. Okay, so someone mentioned a green burrowing anemone. Not quite. Not an aggregating anemone either. Again, same genus, pretty close. Someone guessed a mountain dew anemone. I'm not sure if that's a joke or a real species. I hope it's a real species. I'd be thrilled to learn that there's a species called the mountain dew anemone. But let's see what iNaturalist thinks. So when you upload a photo onto iNaturalist, there's an artificial intelligence algorithm that will process the photo and compare it to other observations posted. And when you try that, iNaturalist says, we're pretty sure that it's in the genus Anthropleura. And our top suggestion would be the moon glow anemone. And that's based on both the image itself and also on other images that have been uploaded in the same area. So that is what this is. This is a moon glow anemone. So close to the aggregating anemone and close to the green surf anemone, but slightly unique. You can see these little white bands in the tentacles. It gives it kind of a luminous glowing look. But the iNaturalist algorithm, I've been quite impressed using it. I think often it is pretty smart in what its suggestions are. And so this app, I think both for the purposes of documenting what you see and also getting help with identification, has become super, super popular. Since 2014, it has accumulated over 90 million observations. And currently the rate of increase is that it's roughly doubling every year. So we're looking at some exponential growth. And observations are distributed all over the world, and not just on the land, but also within the oceans. So this kind of heat map here shows you where folks are seeing and uploading lots of species and lots of observations. And you can see that not all the time are these observations identified all the way to species. Sometimes the photo just isn't good enough, or there isn't an expert that's weighed in yet. And so sometimes the photos will stay at maybe a genus level, or even sometimes at a really high level. Like I've got observations that I've just said, it's alive. I don't even know if it's a plant or a seaweed or an animal. I have no idea what it is. And some of them are just sitting at that really high level identification. But these 90 million observations have been uploaded by over 2 million observers. So lots and lots of people worldwide using this app and generating tons and tons of data. And like Michelle was talking about earlier, some of that data can be used for monitoring butterflies. We can do lots and lots of things with this. So one example I wanted to mention was this project feature. And so you can create projects that maybe capture, for example, there's a Crabs of the World project. This one is called BC Marine, and it's run by John Reynolds and myself. And it's set up to automatically capture any marine species in British Columbia. So we've drawn this map, this little line, you can see this orange polygon, and it captures anything uploaded below the high tide line. And then we've gone through and done some more filters to filter out species that we know aren't marine, like, for example, like beetles or something like that. And so we've gotten over 100,000 observations of over 2,000 species. And so I think a really cool application for these projects is that you can take either a region or a group of creatures that you're interested in, and you can kind of use these projects to collect all these observations and make some really cool broad scale understandings of these areas. And I want to zoom in on one specific observation in this region because it's kind of an exciting example of some of the really interesting things we can do with iNaturalist data. And that is to look at some species distributions, which basically just means where are we seeing animals, where are we seeing plants, where are they distributed over the world. So this is a really big fish. This is a hoodwinker mola. You can see in the background of the photo, there's this person's legs, and that gives you a bit of a sense of the scale for how large this fish is. And it washed up in Haida Gwaii, up in northern BC. Now, this is a fish that we often don't see in this region. And there's another kind of fish in the area called the mola mola, which some of you may have heard of, which is a lot more common. So this hoodwinker mola was a pretty exciting find. I'm going to show you a picture of the species distribution from iNaturalist. So the observation that I just showed you is up on the top and it's starred. And then you can see that the majority of the other observations of the species are coming from regions around Australia and New Zealand, because this is otherwise a pretty southern hemisphere fish. This is a fish that you would find more in tropical waters. Now you'll notice just below that star, we've also got this cluster of observations in California, and those marked the first observations ever of this fish in North America or even above the equator. This is a pretty big deal when this fish started being spotted, and iNaturalist was the platform that these observations were first uploaded to and the way that this fish was identified. And it was such a big event when it washed up in California that we even got a slew of international headlines with our own classic, "Scientists shocked by rare giant sunfish washed up on California beach." And for once, the headlines actually weren't exaggerating. This was a pretty shocking event. Originally, when the fish washed up, it was identified as a mola mola, which is the more common type of this sunfish in the area. And some folks started seeing some weird differences. The fish didn't look quite right for mola mola. And so they started tagging other experts onto the observation. And if you go to the thread, there's this huge back and forth of people saying, maybe, no, that's too crazy. It could never happen, but maybe. And eventually the scientists were able to communicate with the folks in the communities all the way across the ocean to say, hey, can you go back, get a photo of the scales? I need a photo of the fin. Can you take a better photo? Can you include a scale bar? And eventually one of the experts commented, holy mola, basically confirming that this was in fact a hoodwinker mola. And this observation has kind of sparked a larger study into the range of the species, which extends much farther north than anyone had thought. And this is, I think, a really cool example of, one of the amazing applications of this app, which is that you've got people all over the world who are submitting observations, and scientists and experts are able to find these and can make some pretty cool discoveries. Now, talking about range, of course, we should talk about climate change. With climate change, as some of you may be aware, some species that are otherwise confined to warmer regions are able to kind of track up the coast towards places that have otherwise been too cold for them. This is a photo of a striped shore crab that I took in Barkley Sound on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So all the way up at the top of this map that shows a heat map of all the places this crab's been observed on iNaturalist. And when I first saw this crab and I was mentioning it to someone, a coworker, they said, no, you must be mistaken. We don't have that species here. That's a southern species. And I went back to the same crack and I found the same crab. And every time I'd go back to the crab and I'd try to get my phone out, it would bury back into the crack. And it took me like almost a month of going out like pretty close to weekly to finally get a photo of this animal to say, look, it's striped. This is a striped shore crab. I'm not losing it. It is up here. And it's a really interesting phenomenon that happens where this crab in California releases its larvae or its babies, and they kind of get swept off the coast on the currents, and they hang out for a little while kind of offshore. And then the currents bring them back around and they're able to settle back onto the coast and grow up as adults. But during El Nino years, when the currents are kind of messed up and the waters are changing, they actually get swept all the way up the coast into British Columbia, where they're able to settle on our shores and grow into adults. However, the waters are actually not really suitable for them to reproduce. They're too cold and the currents don't work the same way. And so the adults will end up in British Columbia, but they're not actually reproductive there. But of course, with climate change, changing currents and changing weather patterns, I think this is an interesting species to take note of. And we can also watch the observations on iNaturalist to see if it is in fact creeping up the shore. The last thing that I wanted to mention, I think, is a really interesting application of iNaturalist is tracking some climate events. So as many of you may have heard on the news, British Columbia was hit by a pretty intense heat wave in the summer of 2021, kind of towards the end of June, with temperatures in the intertidal reaching of up to 40 degrees Celsius. So Chris Harley's group documented and estimated that billions of animals were basically cooked to death on the shoreline. And I was able to go into iNaturalist and search up barnacles, and I filtered those observations based on date to look at the end of the heat wave, and found this collection of observations from that period of quite a few barnacles that had died, but also a handful of barnacles that had survived. And so this has been a really great source of data post heat wave to look at where and what was dying after this giant, likely climate change moderated heat wave. So I've talked a lot about all the ways that iNaturalist is great for scientists, all the ways that we can use this data, but I think it's also really important for the communities as well. I think it's a fun way to get people really excited about nature. Here we have a photo of Dr. John Reynolds taking a picture of this coho salmon, and Brian Strzomski's in the background taking a photo of John Reynolds, and of course I'm taking a photo of both of them. And then you can see on the right the final iNaturalist observation of this salmon that's in the photo being taken. And you can see some kids in the background getting really excited about all the fish in this tub. I think that by using technology, we're able to get people excited about the things around them and also to connect them with each other. I get a lot of text messages from friends and family of, hey, I saw this weird thing on the beach. You're probably sick of these questions, but can you tell me what it is? And I love those questions. They're really fun. But not everyone has a marine biologist or a scientist on speed dial. And so it's a fun way to get everyday people to connect to scientists and get some information about the things they're seeing out in their everyday world. So for scientists, I think iNat can be a really great source of data. It can be really useful for tracking range shifts and climate impacts. I've used it just for collections when we're looking for a specific seaweed. I'll just type into iNaturalist species and just say, where are people finding it in this area? Like, where could I go and find this specific thing? I think it's also a great way for us to participate in outreach and connect with our communities. It's one of my favorite procrastination tools when I don't want to work on my thesis. I'll just pull up the BC Marine Project and I can just scroll through observations and help people identify the things they're seeing. So it's a great way for us to kind of give back and bring some of our knowledge back into the community. And then for the communities themselves, I think it's a great way to connect with nature because you can upload observations of any wild things ever. You can be walking in the street, and this is a photo of some of my classmates and I at Simon Fraser University, and there was a weird bird, and we all just stopped midway through a lunch break, and we're trying to take photos of it to upload it to iNat. And it's a great way, again, like I mentioned earlier, to learn new species and to figure out what you're seeing in the areas around you. And then, of course, people, I think, derive a lot of pride in contributing to this kind of community science, knowing that their observations are going towards a larger project and are making a difference. And I think I've got them separated out on this photo of scientists and communities, but of course these are connected. And I think scientists are part of their communities and we wear different hats. When I'm taking pictures of birds, I'm not a scientist. I'm an average Joe person who doesn't know anything about birds. And I'm also uploading lots of blurry photos and asking experts for help. So I think this is a great way for these two groups to connect, but also talk to each other and kind of go back and forth. So I'll leave you all with this challenge. There is an international annual challenge called the City Nature Challenge, and it is a bit of a bio blitz, so an opportunity to collect as many species as you can and upload them to iNaturalist. And so the Greater Vancouver region is participating this year, and it's running from April 29th to May 2nd. And I looked it up, and Halifax has a project as well. So this is my challenge to you East Coasters. End of April, let's see who can find the most species and upload them to iNaturalist. Thank you all so much for listening. It's been really a great opportunity to learn more, and I hope that we can have a nice conversation with us afterwards. And yeah, please feel free to get in touch through email or through Twitter. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Em. That was so infectious. I'm definitely going to be more hooked on iNaturalist now. So at this point, I'm going to open up the general session questions. So we have about 10 minutes, and we do have Em, Emily, and Michelle here. So if you guys have any specific questions for any of these three speakers, you can do that. Or if you have general questions about conservation and climate change outreach, now is your time to ask all three of them at once as well.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Tseng, actually. I would love to do something similar to the butterfly project that you described. And I was just wondering what were the main hurdles in establishing that network of native gardens, and where did you source your native plants, and like what kind of maintenance was involved, and how did you, like, was it difficult to distribute those plants?
Can I ask where you're located, Will?
Yeah, I'm actually in Boston, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the plant aspect of that project fell under the Butterfly Way program of the David Suzuki Foundation. And so the plant sourcing was difficult because you need the native plants of that particular area. And so there was a lot of research that went into getting the right plants. And then the plants themselves came from garden centers, but it's actually, it's tricky because some of the native plants, you can't get them at garden centers, and you don't want people sort of running around and uprooting native plants from different areas. So I guess my advice to you is, it's not a one-person job for sure. It's something that will require different organizations coming together to facilitate that project. So I would reach out to local like gardening groups or local nature groups, and try to get that conversation started that way, because I think it would, many hands make light work. So if you can get that collaboration going, I think it would help a lot.
Thanks.
Next up is Kristen.
I just wanted to say for near Boston, not in Boston, but Framingham, the Native Plant Trust has a bunch of super good resources, and they were recently coming out with a guide of native plants and that kind of stuff. So I would definitely check them out. Uli, I can't remember his last name, is a super awesome guide I'd reach out to about native plants in the area. So that was just for that.
Thank you. Zongwa, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just it's not super formed as a question, but like I am very tempted to do the iNat thing as well, like in a quantitative study-ish thingy. So just thinking out loud here, would it be biased if like the data points are like based on human distribution? So like if it's on the West Coast, would it be like a lot of points around the greater Vancouver area and like much less points in, let's say, well, in the woods, like farther woods? Would the data be biased based on that? And specifically, if I am more interested in plants and fungi? That's my question.
Yes, that's a great question. Absolutely, data are certainly biased towards places of higher human traffic. There's a really cool grad student whose name I'm currently forgetting at SFU who's currently trying to do some corrections for that. They've got people walking down roads, and then they've got volunteers tromping through the forest, and they're trying to use some experiments to try to figure out, are the things people are seeing in these highly trafficked areas representative of the areas around them as well. I think as far as feeling good about contributing, I think all data are good data. So if you're only taking photos of mosses or fungi, I think that's still really, really useful. I think a lot of scientists are thinking quite hard about how to use this kind of data where, it'll tell you if something's been seen in a place, but it won't tell you what hasn't been seen there. And so I think that's kind of just an inherent problem with this kind of data, but it definitely doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using it. So yeah, get out there, take some photos.
Thank you so much.
Michelle, did you want to jump in on that?
I have a separate question.
Okay. Okay, well, go ahead with your separate question then, and then we'll go to Luai after.
I'm okay to wait. I think Luai's hand was up before mine. Is that?
Sure. Okay, Luai, do you want to go next?
Hi, I have a question for Em. I don't use iNaturalist very often, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on using it for microorganisms.
Yeah, I think that's a completely valid way to use it. I've uploaded like plankton species and I've gotten like some pretty positive identifications on some pretty obscure tiny things. So yeah, I think really anything alive is fair game. And yeah, I'm sure there is a community of experts out there that would be thrilled to see more observations in that field.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I'll message you later and maybe we can chat more.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
I love the level of collaboration that's happening with all of these iNaturalist enthusiasts. That's great. So my order here, I have Michelle next. So do you want to go ahead with your question, Michelle?
Sure. My question is for Emily about belugas. I don't know if you're here with us still, Emily?
Yeah, I think she's still here.
Okay.
Yes, I'm joined by Batman.
Okay.
Oh,
hi. Oh.
Hi.
You mentioned that belugas are getting smaller over time. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a bit more. Like, is that like a global phenomenon? Do we know why that's happening, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is based on just the Beaufort population, and it's based on harvester data. So they're basically, it's inferred growth rate. So it's length at age. So that in comparison to the age of the belugas, they're smaller than they used to be. I'm not aware of. I know that there's over about 20 different subpopulations or stocks of belugas around the world, and I don't know of any other declines in growth rates. I know that there are, or in body size at age. I know that is a phenomenon for other Arctic species, fish, and I believe copepods as well. So that has been reported. I know it has been reported, I think, in sheep in New Zealand, because I have looked at some trans and mammals, but that has been reported in other Arctic vertebrates, not marine mammals, and it's believed to be due to, I guess, warming temperatures and climate change.
thank you, Emily. Okay, so now we will go on to Will. I think you're on mute.
I think Lisa was actually had her hand raised before me if she wants to go.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't know why the order for me is putting you guys first. Lisa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I just have a quick question for Em. I guess two questions. So one is, I know iNaturalist has a spin-off app also called Seek. I'm just wondering, like, when should we use one over the other? Question one. Second question is, sometimes I go out and take pictures like butterflies and things like that. Like, phone is not ideal to take pictures, then I would use a camera. But then using the camera, uploading the photos is an extra step. And on top of that, it doesn't have the GPS coordinate. So I'm wondering, like, what is like a more streamlined system to upload onto iNaturalist?
Those are two great questions. Thank you. So I haven't used the Seek app a lot. My understanding is that Seek is kind of geared towards the identification side, where you can use it to try to figure out what you're seeing. And then Seek will be linked to iNat. So it says, okay, we've helped you identify this photo. Do you want to also post it on iNaturalist? So I think that's kind of the way the two of them have been kind of integrated, but not necessarily doing the same thing. And then the second question, I have this issue with dive photos as well, because when I'm taking pictures underwater on my camera, they're not geotagged. And so someone has told me that when he's taking macro photos with his camera, he'll often snap a photo on his phone as well. And we'll use that to link the time and location data. I'm not sure if you're using the website. I find the website much easier for batch uploading. So when I'm diving, I'll put all my photos onto my laptop, and then you can just take the whole folder and just drag it into the upload browser. And then you can edit the location for all those photos at the same time. And it won't be as accurate as it would be if it had been tracking my whole dive. But I think that the geolocation data is like roughly, if like I'm diving at a certain bay, like I know that the observations came from inside that bay. So I found that to be a way to kind of try to streamline it a little bit. Yeah, ideally it would be a bit faster, but that's kind of my workaround.
Yes, thank you. I also have a lot of dive pictures that I don't know what to do with. So yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Thanks so much, Lisa. All right, well, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my question is also for you, Em. And I've run a couple projects on iNat for various reasons, and I thought it was really cool that you were able to set like the spatial parameters to the high tide line. I've had trouble making specific boundaries for the projects. I've only been able to kind of limit it to addresses and not been able to do like a radius or something as specific as that. So could you briefly tell me how you did that?
Yeah, so it involves creating a place, which is a kind of complicated process. But if I had to Google how to make a place, but it kind of goes through a bit of a back-end channel, and there's an option for you to set little, like you can go along and like click, 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 and kind of define the boundary, and then it'll just draw a polygon connecting those points. John Reynolds actually worked with someone to use a raster file to trace the BC coastline. It's not super accurate. And so we've gone through to certain places of high importance and have like physically drawn out the coastline in those areas and have added those places to the project. But if you're interested in like a rough region, that probably is your best bet. They kind of discourage you against making too many places. It puts a lot of data on the website. But yeah, that's an option for making a project based on location.
Great, thank you. So the function is it's just called creating a place, and it lets you draw that polygon.
I'll see if I can find, I'll Google the how-to file, and then I can link that in the chat for you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, so I have a question. I still don't know how to put my hand up, but I think I'm the only one in line right now. So my question is for Emily. So I know that for your PhD work that you shared with us, you were working with local communities and you had that engagement going. So could you just touch on what are the strengths of doing that? So how does your research generally benefit? As well as if you have any tips for other researchers that might be looking into doing the same for their work.
So, I mean, I think because of that partnership, I was able to study a really large number of whales, 200 whales, where, I mean, obviously getting samples is very difficult. So, I mean, whales in general are very difficult species to study logistically. And so it was through this harvest that I was actually able to study their physiology. And I think too that, again, it's great. I think community-based research, particularly in the North, is so important because it's great to have people on the ground there, have like local capacity to study the impacts of climate change. Like I'm only there, I live in the South. Was only there in the summer, but we had, because of our partnerships with the communities, we learned about. In 2014, there were whales in Ulahaktak where they hadn't been for 30 years because of changing ice conditions. We found out that they were feeding on sand lance, which was something that they hadn't done either. And so, based on these community partnerships, we were able to really have people in the community to use to benefit from Indigenous traditional knowledge with a lot of which helped with a lot of our research questions and provided us with additional information on the whales. And sorry, was there another question you had?
Yeah, the second part was just general tips for other researchers that might want to engage with local community members to enhance their research as well.
So I think, before I even started my research project, I went to the communities in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk and went and met with community groups and elders and made sure everyone knew who I was. And I did a lot of consultation. So I think that the first step in order to do this is to go and visit the communities, connect with local hunters and trappers organizations, and make sure they know who you are, and obviously consult with the work you want to do and see whether there's any questions that the communities have.
Awesome, thank you so much. That's super helpful. Okay, so I think if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to thank again all of our speakers for this session, and we will now be going on a 22-minute break. So we will meet back here at 1:20 with our second session of the day, which will be on avenues for scientific outreach. So we'll see you all then.